Welcome to the Next Chapter Podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Stacey and former colleague. Stacey and I had a chance to work together when she was the camp director and I was one of the counselors at a preschool day camp. And she also is a fellow Midwesterner who has also transplanted to the East Coast. So welcome, Stacey, to the Next Chapter community.
So nice to be here, Andrea. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited for our conversation today, where we will really be talking about the importance of giving to others, volunteering, and how that can really bring joy, and also about embracing change. And I think we already have proved at the beginning of this conversation that both of us have embraced change, that we moved from the Midwest to the East Coast. So that is one example of change. So Stacey, can you take me back to the very first memory that you have of doing some kind of community service work or volunteer work? Like your kind of, even if you can go back to even childhood, if you remember that.
Sure. So my mom was always volunteering at our school, but what I remember the most is that she was very involved in our synagogue, and she was in charge of membership and helping maintain the relationships between people in the community and recruit new members to our synagogue. And so as a kid, I would be along with her sometimes for those meetings, for the events. And so my parents and my mom really started a legacy of giving back, of volunteering.
Which is beautiful because it shows, as we'll discuss throughout this conversation, that is a legacy that you're giving to your children as well. And I had the privilege of participating in an event that you and your daughter planned last weekend. So before we really talk more about your volunteer work, can you take us back to the beginning of your professional career, where you went to school and what you were planning on doing?
So I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I majored in psychology and behavioral sciences in the law. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was on this kind of like pre-law track. And my senior year, my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and I started volunteering in an after-school program. And I kind of had this like light bulb, like, I think I want to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. She was an elementary school teacher and a preschool teacher. And so I'd like grown up in the education world my whole life. And that kind of like changed my path a little bit. So I graduated from University of Wisconsin and went straight to the University of Pennsylvania, where I got certified at the same time as I got my master's degree in elementary education. And then I started teaching in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I started teaching first grade. And then when my husband and I moved to New Jersey, I continued to teach there until my son was born.
That, again, it shows from the beginning that you weren't afraid of change, that you were on this path. You thought that that's where you were going, that you were going to be going into law. And then through your experience, that was great that you had that awareness that wasn't the path that you wanted to take. So you started teaching and you were teaching here. And then what kind of happened next?
So my husband and I decided that I was going to be a stay-at-home parent. It was something that we decided as a family, and was important to both of us, which, I'm aware that's like a huge privilege to be able to do that and to have that, be able to make that decision. And so I was basically home with my son until the camp director at the nursery school was like, "Hey, you're a teacher. Do you want to teach?" And I spent a summer as a camp counselor. And then I had my daughter. And then a few years after I had my daughter, the camp director retired, and I was asked if I wanted to become the camp director. And I had all of my training and experience in elementary education, and I was a little bit nervous about taking on this big role with in administration and with young children. But it was perfect. It was in my community. It was at a place that I loved, that my children were at, that I was familiar with, and I knew I had a lot of support within the synagogue and with the teachers who I knew, and I went for it. And
And I appreciate that because, like I said, I had the privilege of working with you, and I can 100% relate to a lot of what you said. That I personally took some time off too to be home with my children, so I can understand that that's an important decision to make, and also then to go back and to be able to take this opportunity in a community that you were familiar with, but with a population that you weren't so familiar
yeah,
with the preschool. And that was the same with me. I taught elementary school, and I then, was the camp counselor and ultimately a teacher at the preschool. But so my question, I guess, is what about you kind of allowed you to be able to embrace something that was different than what you were used to?
I think that along the way, I was involved in opportunities that gave me some of the skills that I was able to transfer. When I was teaching, I helped run our after school program, so I had experience managing other adult staff members, and I brought some of the experience that I had in leadership in college, in my sorority, and some of the stuff that I was doing other volunteer organizations on the early childhood school board, and then in the elementary school. I think I was able to transfer that to my job as the camp counselor. There were things that I needed to learn: the budgeting, the Excel spreadsheets, all the health regulations and licensing rules and ratios and stuff like that. I did have to kind of learn all of that. And I was really fortunate, as I mentioned, to be surrounded by people who had experience and were willing to share and to help when I needed the help. And I also felt like somebody else believing in me, that I can do this, gave me the power and the courage to think that I can do this. The fact that that I was asked, that other people saw that I could do this, was motivating, and it was kind of like that embrace of support from the other people I was working with.
Well, there are so many beautiful things in that. I actually, honestly, got the chills when you said that when someone asked you to do this and they believed in you, which then in turn allowed you to really believe in yourself. And so that was really important. And something else that I wanted to point out, that you, even though you didn't have the experience per se with that preschool population, that you did have leadership experience, that you did have the skills that you had earned when you were teaching. And even before that, when you were in your sorority, how you mentioned, and I think that people many times get nervous to embrace change, to embrace growth, because they think that they don't have the skills and don't think that some of their skills are transferable. So I think that that's so important to point out, that you recognize that. And also the openness to learn and to be able to say, okay, I may not know something, but I'm willing to learn it to add to my skills. And the fact that you had that support system too is really great. So after, I know you're not the camp director now, But where did that take you? So again, embracing change, growth, where's the next path?
The job was perfect for me for a very long time. I loved the ability to work with the staff members, the parents, the teenage counselors, and also the delicious, preschool children. I
So
feel
cute.
like I really got a lot out of all these different roles that I was able to play. It also worked for my family very well, and that was very important to me. I was able to do the job during the school year while my kids were in school for the most part. It was very flexible. And then I was working full time during the summer while they were away at camp. And I did it for 10 years, and we went through no camp or virtual camp with COVID, which was a whole, learning curve. I had never done anything virtual, and we put on an entire camp summer virtually. And then the following year was the first year back with COVID, which was also, every day there was a new challenge that we had never faced before. But at the same time, things were changing in our family. COVID had really changed a lot for us. And my son was graduating high school. My daughter was in middle school. And it wasn't the right job for me at the time. And I started to think about what I wanted to be when I grow up.
That's an important question.
And when I first took on the job, I thought, when my kids are old enough, I think I'll go back into the classroom. And I realized that wasn't really my dream anymore. And so also at the same time, as all this is going on, one of the things that was important to me, as you said at the very beginning, was community service and exposing my kids to community service. And I'm really fortunate to belong to a synagogue where that is one of the values. And from the very beginning, it was something that we were able to connect with. And when my kids were little, we delivered Thanksgiving meals, and we helped with meals for the homeless population. And when it came time to pick a mitzvah project, my son picked Tony's Kitchen, which is a soup kitchen in Montclair. And, the community service always seemed to be for my children. And then they asked me to come and help some more. And I realized this is really for me also. And so I started going once a week on Thursday mornings and volunteering there. And then when COVID hit, I was unable to be on site there because I was managing COVID Zoom school at home. But I really wanted to be able to continue to be involved in some way because the need for food and support for this population was increasing exponentially. And so I reached out and I said, what can I do from home? And I started slowly organizing townwide food drives. And then I started taking on scheduling volunteers to deliver food to families that were unable to get out, and to seniors who were also unable to get out. And then finally, when their intern handling their communications, her semester was over, I jumped in and took that. So during this kind of crazy COVID time, I was doing all this work from home kind of behind the scenes for Tony's Kitchen. And that really enabled me to get a very big picture view of what was going on outside of my world. I was like sitting in my house at my dining room table, having, my kids on Zoom school. And I see that there are hundreds and hundreds of seniors in Montclair who can't leave their house and who need food. And that these families who were getting, their kids were getting food through school, all of a sudden had their kids home and they couldn't work and they couldn't afford to buy food, and we were delivering to them. The work was so fulfilling because I knew I was making an immediate impact. So this was also going on at the same time. And then when camp started, I kind of pulled back on that a little bit, so that I could be at camp, and still held on to some of the things that I can do at the same time. So kind of all this was going on, my family changing, the COVID, and I had been doing camp for 10 years and I was ready for a change. And it's interesting. I can pinpoint the friend, I can pinpoint the conversation. As I've mentioned, this was my community. Like, the synagogue is a really important place to me. I still work there in a different capacity. And I just didn't allow myself to think about not working at camp. And until a friend said to me, well, let's talk about this. And I was like, the little light bulb went off and I was like, maybe this is the right thing. So I stepped down, and I had the privilege of working to help them find a new camp director. And I worked side by side with her until the first week of camp that next summer. And it was really fulfilling to take something that I had worked so hard to create and nurture and hand it off to somebody and know that it was in really good hands. And so it didn't feel like, quitting or retiring. It felt like passing something on, passing the torch on to somebody who was perfect for the job. And so that summer I said to Tony's Kitchen, give me more. And I've been doing some more with them. One of the things that I've been doing is social media, which I have zero experience in other than scrolling. And again, the person who had been doing it before me, who interestingly was, a young mom who decided to go back to school. So she had her own kind of pivot in life. She sat with me and she taught me, and I learned, and I continue to learn about it. And I feel like it was a good move. It was a positive change.
There was so much, again, to point out, and I appreciate kind of you sharing your journey and the awareness that you really had to have in order to recognize that it was time for a change and to embrace that. And how you said, you may have been thinking about it, but then there was that light bulb moment conversation that allowed you to broaden your view and think about, well, what is important to you? It sounds like you did, a check-in with your values and finding something that was fulfilling and giving back, which I think is really important. That's something that I work on with many of my clients when they're really struggling to figure out what's going on. You need to reconnect with your values. I also think that it's important to point out that critical moments like, with COVID or events or family events, that dynamics that are changing within a family can be beautiful times. It can also be moments that are kind of stressful or kind of allow us to stop and think about and reevaluate what is working. And what worked 10 years before isn't necessarily going to work for someone in the present moment. And I think, again, where people get stuck is when they don't embrace change, when they don't recognize that it's okay to make that change. And how you said it, you didn't feel that you were quitting, that you were growing, and then you were helping someone else kind of grow. That is so important to really point out. So I appreciate you kind of sharing about that. And going back to now, you're in this capacity where it's super fulfilling, that you're giving back, and that you kind of said also, which was really interesting, is that community service was always important to you to be able to teach your children, but then it became something for yourself, which, again, for mothers, a lot of times we're always trying to do things for our family, for our children, and at times we forget about ourselves and what fills our own bucket. So that was so beautifully said. So Can you now talk a little bit more about your role just in general about giving back to the community? Because I know I personally last Sunday was involved in this beautiful program that you organized at the synagogue with your daughter. And I know that there are so many different opportunities that you provide for them.
So right now, I'm a volunteer doing a lot of different things at Tony's Kitchen. And I've learned so much about food insecurity and the need for food that is really right in our backyard. And again, I wanted to expose my kids to it, and I think it has been invaluable to them to be able to do something hands-on and really make a difference for other people. I think that having something where you are giving back, whether it's to an animal shelter or to, something in food insecurity, any kind of community service, I think of as, a core value in our family. And it's a part of our life. And interestingly, the idea of self-care and about taking care of yourself has been, super important lately, especially with COVID. And an article I read was that giving back is self-care. And there's so many benefits to service. And one of those things is, it is taking care of yourself. It's being able to focus on someone else or something else. And to whatever your skill is, whether it's money, whether it's time, whatever it is, being able to give back, I think is really important.
That's so interesting with that article, and an interesting look on it, because I think most people think self-care is exercising, eating right, getting the sleep. But as you pointed out, that pointing the focus onto someone else and feeling from inside the difference, the impact that you are making for someone else, and shifting the focus again from yourself to someone else is really interesting. And so and I also wanted to point out, just because I know you so well and your kind of philanthropic work, that not only are you giving back and you're doing the work, but that you support others that are doing the work. So for example, my daughter during COVID had the bake sale and was doing these virtual classes, and you supported that. And so did your daughter participated in one of the classes, or you asked us to bake some things when we needed gluten-free, or my daughter made some cupcakes, or most recently, my son is raising money for a family in Guatemala that he had a chance to meet, and you supported that as well. And so that's just the impact that you're making on me and my family. And I'm sure that there are other members of the community that are doing service work that you're supporting as well. So that I thought was really important to point
Thank you.
out.
One of the things that I'm doing new this year is I'm involved with a group of teens at our synagogue in a community service focused program. And it's really fulfilling to watch and teach them what the needs are in our community and hear their thoughts about it and be able to provide them with opportunities to give back.
Which is so neat, because it's kind of, grooming the next generation, so to speak, and also allowing people to open up their eyes to the things that are happening within Montclair. From where we live is right. 10 minutes. My son goes to school in Montclair, and I know, and it's crazy. I don't know if the word crazy, but it's eye-opening to think that literally a community that I drive through on a daily basis has people really in need. And so that's so important. So can you kind of share how it's important to give back to the global community, but also think about within your own, backyard, so to speak.
I think a lot of times we think that these are, other populations that are having these problems, but a lot of our neighbors, a lot of our friends, a lot of our families may be a job loss or, God forbid, an illness away from struggling. And I think that those of us who can, it's our responsibility, and it's our job to support other people when they're struggling. And I see that every day when people pick up their groceries. They don't look like the people that you would expect to need groceries necessarily. There are people from all different communities, all different walks of life, families, people who have people who are not homeless and who have jobs, but are just, the groceries allow them to pay their car insurance, or the groceries allow them to, be able to put clothes on their children. And so I think that it's just, when you can, it's your responsibility to care for others, whether they're your next door neighbor or whether they're, the next town over. And I think that, everybody is kind of feeling, the changes from COVID and the financial changes, whether it's changing how you live or how you spend, everybody is seeing this. And so you can only imagine, how the price of milk is affecting somebody who's really living dollar to dollar or paycheck to paycheck.
And that's important because I think that there's some education around that. And how you pointed out that these people don't look homeless. That really resonated with me, because when I was younger, one of my memories of giving back, because that's a core value of mine as well, was one day I think I heard, I don't remember exactly how old I was, definitely elementary school. I heard that a local church was housing the homeless. And both my parents were on the action committee at our temple, and this is in Michigan. And I said to my parents, I said, well, why can't we do that at our temple? Like, why, the churches are doing it. Why can't we bring this to our temple? And so my parents thought that was a wonderful idea, presented it to the temple. And sure enough, we planned this, and we set up a homeless shelter for a week at our temple. And I helped, play with the kids and do what I could at a young age. But what came out as I got older was that apparently there was a member, I might be getting the story slightly confused, but there was a member, I think, from our Jewish community that was a younger gentleman, and he was at the shelter. And it was just, he got down on his luck. He lost a job, and one thing led to another, and he couldn't pay his bills anymore. And then there was someone else that was, that we recognized, a graduate from a top university, again, got down on his luck and wound up in this shelter. And so the members of the community stepped up and got these two gentlemen the support that they needed, the career counseling and all of that. So it is so important that we educate ourselves, we educate our children, that there really is no description of someone that's struggling. And that is that education piece, the fact that you're teaching, the teens at the temple now, what the needs are. So can you just speak a little bit more to that? Like, what are some things that, as we wrap up, kind of the people need to recognize when they're thinking about kind of giving back?
I think the story that you told is fantastic. It's to make our children and ourselves aware of what other people might be going through. And I think that being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes for a moment is a valuable lesson, not just for community service, but for life itself, to think about how you can't make assumptions based on what a person looks like, or where they went to school, or where they live. And I think that's very important. The other thing I think that's important when you're thinking about giving back is it every little bit counts. So if you're at the grocery store and you take an extra can of soup and put it in the bin as you're walking out, you're making a difference. It doesn't have to be one day a week. It doesn't have to even be one weekend, one Sunday a month. If you can do what you can to make a difference, and again, even donating money, because these organizations, they need money to run. At Tony's Kitchen, we get donated food, but there's also food that we need to actually purchase. Of course, things that need to be paid for. So however you can support and give back to the community, find your own way. There's an organization called Lasagna Love that I participate in, and I think you're familiar with it, where you can sign up to do it one time or once a week, where you just deliver a lasagna to somebody who needs it. And they could need it because they've lost their job, because they're a stressed out family and they're just at their wits' end. People have been ill, and it's a very quick thing. You can sign up to do it once, and you text the person, you drop it off at their doorstep, and you've made a difference in someone's life. And whether it's a can of soup, whether it's lasagna, whether it's a bag of dog food that you drop off at the shelter, I think that just making it a part of your life is important. And like you did, asking those questions, being aware of the needs. I think it's just an important value.
I think that is so important. And that reminds me that we saw your post that Tony's Kitchen needed something. And Brad told me that he was on his way to Costco. And I said, you know what? When you're at Costco, can you pick up an extra big thing of pasta and drop it off at Stacey's on the way home? And that's exactly what he did, because it does make a big impact. And the one thing that I also wanted to point out too is that even giving of your time is huge too, because time is, it's priceless, it's valuable. And once you give it, you can't get it back. So if for whatever reason also that you don't feel that extra can that, you don't want to purchase that giving your time to an event and volunteering really makes a huge impact as well.
I want to add that for families with children, and especially young children, food is something that they understand. It's very tangible to them. And where homelessness or, not having a job or bigger issues might not be as relatable to them, food really is. And it's like often a very nice entry point for families to be able to give back. The other thing I wanted to mention is there are a ton of really wonderful organizations and websites that match volunteers to causes. And, we've talked a lot about food insecurity today, but there are, you can give back through the environment, you can give back through political action for, volunteering for your local government. There's so many ways to serve the community that you can, find what's right for you and find what's right for your family.
I think that that's really important to point out that exactly, it has to feel good to you and what works for you, what works for your family, what works for your interests. And also, yes, the food aspect for teaching young kids, because I think we all can feel it. We all know what it feels like to be hangry. Like when you're hungry and you get angry, and just imagine a little kid, can feel that. They get agitated, they start having tantrums. So that's something that certainly can, that they can relate to. So kind of as we wrap up, any other parting words that you want to share about either volunteering or embracing change, or any, kind of last gem that someone can put in their pocket as they move forward?
As a parent and as an educator, I've often said to my children and to students, like, growth doesn't come without being uncomfortable, and it doesn't come without failure. And I think that that's an important lesson for adults as well. And that knowing that change is hard, that change is going to come with being uncomfortable, is very important. And recognizing that you can be excited and challenged, but also uncomfortable at the same time, and still like holding all of those feelings together and still move forward with that challenge is very important. It's change is hard, but it's how we grow and it's how we evolve. So I thank you for having me and for helping me think about those things.
Well, I appreciate it because it is true. People that fight against change are going to really come up against a brick wall, because every day the weather changes, we change, we get one day older. And when you, like you said, you fight against it, or you have a choice, or you can embrace it and understand that that uncomfortable feeling is normal, that growth is beautiful, and that we are all evolving, as you beautifully had said during this conversation, and that we constantly need to check in with ourselves and see, okay, what's working at this very moment for me, and what kind of changes do I need in order to continue a life that I feel happy about, that I'm excited to get up every day and feel fulfilled. And so I appreciate you sharing this. I appreciate you being part of another community, the Next Chapter community of women supporting each other on our journeys. And to all the listeners out there, I encourage you to think about, what is one change that you can embrace today. I look forward to seeing the different changes that you continue to make, Stacey. So I appreciate everything that you shared. Thank you.